June 18, 1815. Napoleon Bonaparte has exactly 9 hours left before his empire collapses forever. One wrong move, one delayed order, one miscalculation, and everything he's fought for across 2 decades vanishes. But here's what most people don't know. Waterloo wasn't lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the 72 hours before the first shot was ever fired. And the mistakes made during those 3 days, they're the same ones that destroy careers, relationships, and opportunities today. Because Napoleon didn't lose because he was outfought. He lost because of something far more dangerous. Let me show you what I mean. 4 days before Waterloo, Napoleon was winning. He just pulled off one of the most brilliant strategic moves of his career, driving a wedge between 2 massive armies, the British under Wellington and the Prussians under Blucher. His plan was simple: keep them separated, destroy them one at a time. On June 16th, he sent Marshal Ney to hold Wellington at Quatre Bras while he personally smashed the Prussians at Ligny. It worked. The Prussians retreated. Napoleon had them. But then he made his first critical error. And it wasn't tactical, it was human. He assumed the Prussians were broken. He assumed they'd retreat east, away from Wellington, licking their wounds. This is what every defeated army in Europe had done for the past 15 years. So Napoleon didn't pursue them aggressively. He didn't verify. He assumed. Meanwhile, Blucher, the 72-year-old Prussian commander, was literally buried under his dead horse during the retreat. His officers found him hours later, bruised, possibly concussed, reeking of gin and rhubarb liniment. Any rational commander would have withdrawn to regroup. Blucher did the opposite. He ordered his entire army to march north, toward Wellington, not away. He was going to link up with the British, even if it killed him. Napoleon had no idea. Now here's where it gets interesting. On June 17th, Wellington chose his ground at Waterloo, a low ridge south of Brussels. It wasn't dramatic terrain, just some muddy slope with a few farms scattered across it. But Wellington understood something Napoleon had forgotten. Defensive warfare had changed. The way you positioned troops, the way you used terrain, even the way you absorbed punishment, it all mattered more than aggressive genius now. Wellington placed most of his 68,000 troops on the reverse slope of the ridge. This meant Napoleon's artillery, his greatest weapon, couldn't see them to target them effectively. He fortified 3 key positions: Hougoumont Chateau on his right, La Haye-Saint Farm in the center, and Papelotte on his left. These weren't just buildings, they were force multipliers, defended strong points that would channel and break French attacks. Napoleon arrived on the morning of June 18th with 72,000 men and 246 artillery pieces. He looked at Wellington's position and saw weakness. The British line looked thin, exposed. He told his officers they'd be in Brussels by nightfall, eating dinner as conquerors. His chief of staff, Marshal Soult, warned him, "Wellington is a bad general. The English are bad troops, and this affair is nothing more than eating breakfast," Napoleon replied. That sentence haunts military historians because it reveals something terrifying. Napoleon had started believing his own legend. He'd stopped seeing reality. He'd stopped adapting. After 20 years of winning, he thought winning was inevitable. But the ground itself was working against him. The previous night's rain had turned the battlefield into a swamp. Napoleon delayed his attack until 11:30 a.m., waiting for the ground to dry so his artillery could move. Every hour he waited was an hour closer the Prussians could get. He knew they were coming, somewhere, eventually. He just didn't know when or how many or how fast. The battle opened with a massive French artillery barrage, 80 guns firing simultaneously. The sound was heard in Brussels, 12 miles away. But remember Wellington's reverse slope positioning? Most of the cannonballs plunged harmlessly into soft mud or sailed over the hidden British troops. The bombardment that should have shattered Wellington's line barely touched it. Then Napoleon ordered his brother Jerome to attack Hougoumont. This was supposed to be a diversion, pulling Wellington's reserves to his right flank. But Jerome, desperate to prove himself, threw more and more troops into the attack. What started as a feint became an obsession. By day's end, France would commit 14,000 men to capture one chateau defended by 2,000. They never took it. Wellington never reinforced it beyond a few companies. Napoleon's diversion consumed a quarter of his infantry for zero gain. At 1:30 p.m., Marshal Ney launched the main assault. 16,000 French infantry in dense columns marched up the ridge toward Wellington center. They were professionals, veterans, men who'd conquered Europe. They climbed through mud, through cannon fire, through musket volleys. They reached the ridgeline, and then they saw, for the first time, the full British line, rising from the reverse slope, 4 ranks deep, firing synchronized volleys at point-blank range. The French columns recoiled. But here's what makes this moment psychologically devastating. Those French soldiers had done this 100 times before. The column attack, the intimidation, the breakthrough, it had always worked. Now it didn't, and they couldn't understand why. The rules had changed, and nobody told them. Ney regrouped. Around 4 p.m., Ney saw movement behind Wellington's line, troops shifting. He thought Wellington was retreating, so Ney, acting on impulse, without orders, launched every cavalry unit he had, 5,000 horsemen charging up the ridge. It was magnificent. It was also suicide. Wellington's infantry formed squares, hollow rectangles of men bristling with bayonets. Cavalry cannot break a square. The horses won't charge into the wall of steel. For 90 minutes, French cavalry circled these squares like sharks, being shot down by the hundreds, achieving nothing. Napoleon watched this disaster unfold and didn't stop it. Why? We still don't know. Some historians think he was ill that day, possibly suffering from hemorrhoids or a urinary infection, unable to think clearly. Others think he'd simply lost his tactical edge. Either way, the emperor who'd once controlled battles like chess games now watched his army bleed itself dry on an objective it couldn't take. Then, at 4:30 p.m., the horizon to the east turned dark. 50,000 Prussians, Blücher's entire corps, emerged from the woods. They'd marched 17 miles through mud to get there. Napoleon had to split his forces, sending his elite Imperial Guard to hold off the Prussians while still trying to break Wellington. At 7 p.m., with daylight fading, Napoleon made his final gamble. He committed his last reserve, the Middle Guard, 3,000 of his finest troops, the men who'd never been defeated. They marched up the ridge in perfect formation. Wellington's guards, lying hidden in the wheat, rose at 30 yards and fired. The Middle Guard broke. For the first time in Napoleonic history, the Imperial Guard retreated. A French officer shouted, "La garde recule," the guard retreats. That sentence destroyed an army's morale in seconds. The French line collapsed. Wellington stood in his stirrups, took off his hat, and waved it toward the French, the signal for general advance. The entire Allied line surged forward. The French army disintegrated into a panicked mob. Napoleon tried to rally them. They ran past him. By 9 p.m., the battle was over. By midnight, the French army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Napoleon's casualties, 25,000 dead and wounded, 8,000 captured. Wellington's, 15,000. The Prussians, 7,000. But the real number that matters is this. Within 100 days, Napoleon went from escaping exile to Emperor of France to permanent prisoner on a remote island in the South Atlantic. Waterloo didn't just end a battle, it ended an era. And here's what nobody tells you about Waterloo. It wasn't lost on June 18th. It was lost when Napoleon stopped questioning his assumptions, when he stopped adapting to new realities, when he believed his past success guaranteed future victory. The same trap that destroys everyone who stops learning, stops evolving, stops seeing the world as it actually is. The battlefield is still there, south of Brussels. You can walk the ridge where Wellington stood. The terrain hasn't changed. The lesson hasn't either.